Today, we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. You might have heard it called the world's most dangerous waterway, and for good reason. It's this incredibly critical and incredibly tense stretch of water. There's this quote that just perfectly sums up everything we're about to get into. The world's economy, oil, and the game of power, all tied to one narrow sea lane. And that really is the heart of it, right? We're not just talking about ships and water here. This is about the very lifeblood of the global economy and a massive high-stakes chess game being played out on the world stage. So to really get a grip on all that tension, we've got to start with the basics. We have to look at the geography, because this whole story really is about how one crucial waterway, basically a line on a map, ends up dictating the entire flow of the global economy.
So what is the Strait of Hormuz? Well, the simplest way to think about it is like a vital gateway. It's this one narrow sea lane, and its job is to connect the super resource-rich Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and then from there, boom, you're out in the open ocean connected to the rest of the world.
Okay, so who's on the border? If you look at a map, you'll see Iran to the north, and then down south, you've got Oman's Musandam Peninsula. That's that little piece of land that kind of juts out. And right nearby, of course, is the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. These are the big players here. Their coastlines literally form the edges of this critical choke point.
And this right here is probably the single most important fact you need to know. It is the only way out by sea from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. That's it. If you're a massive oil tanker in the Gulf, there's no plan B, there's no back road. Everything, and I mean everything, has to squeeze through this one single gate. All right, now this is where things get really interesting, because when you first look at the map, the geography kind of plays a trick on you. It creates this illusion of space. You think, hey, there's plenty of room there. But that view is actually dangerously misleading. Get this. At its widest point, the strait is about 95 kilometers across. That's almost 60 miles. Now that sounds like a ton of room, doesn't it? You'd think there's more than enough space for ships to just cruise on through. But here's the million-dollar question, the one that changes the entire picture. Out of all that space, how much of it can those giant oil tankers, the ones carrying the lifeblood of our economy, actually use? Well, the answer is shockingly small. The real usable shipping lanes, one for ships coming in, one for ships going out, are each only about 3 kilometers wide. We're talking less than 2 miles. That's it. I mean, just think about that contrast for a second. It is absolutely staggering. You go from a total width of 95 kilometers all the way down to a usable path that's just 3 kilometers wide. It's like a 10-lane superhighway suddenly funneling down into one single narrow country road. That is the kind of insane bottleneck we are talking about. So you might be asking, okay, it's narrow. Why does that matter so much? Well, it's because this tiny little bottleneck, it acts as the world's main oil artery. This is where the geography of the place smashes right into its massive global economic impact. Just look at the numbers, a staggering 20%. That's 1/5 of the entire planet's oil supply passing through this tiny choke point every single day. We're talking millions and millions of barrels of oil, all being funneled through that tiny 3-kilometer-wide lane. And the consequences of being so dependent on this one spot are, well, they're stark. This quote really says it all. If this route closes, the world's economy could stop. And look, that's not being overly dramatic. That is not an exaggeration. Any kind of blockage here would send instant shockwaves through every energy market around the globe. When you have that much economic importance crammed into one tiny spot, a power struggle is pretty much inevitable. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important point. Geography is power. This is the story of how a simple waterway gets turned into a potential weapon. The term experts use for this is a geopolitical choke point. And it's exactly what it sounds like, a narrow channel that, because of its location, can be controlled to restrict who and what gets through. And let's be clear, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just another choke point. You could easily argue it is the single most critical one on the face of the Earth. So how exactly does someone control it? Well, the geography itself provides all the tools. First, its narrowness makes it super easy to watch and control. Then you have Iran's coastline, which is really mountainous. That gives them a natural high ground, a huge defensive advantage. And then you've got these strategic islands right inside the strait, places like Kesh and Hormuz. You can think of them as unsinkable aircraft carriers, perfect spots to place military assets. Just try to imagine for a second that you're the captain of one of those massive supertankers. This is basically your nightmare checklist. First, you've got to navigate these insanely narrow lanes. Second, you're dealing with constant heavy traffic. Third, the water depths are tricky and always changing. And then, as if all that wasn't enough, you have to constantly worry about the political and military risks. It has to be one of the most stressful jobs in the entire maritime world, for sure. So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway here? It's that we are not just looking at a sea lane on a map. This is the world's economic jugular vein. The flow of oil through it has to be constant, because even the slightest pressure applied right here is felt instantly, everywhere around the world. And so that leaves us with one final and really critical question. In a place where geography, economics, and raw power all collide this intensely, who really holds the key? Who has the power to keep this vital artery open or to close it? The answer to that question, well, it's going to shape our global future.